All right, so let's start this broadcast with a big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. Tensions are on the boil in West Asia as hostilities continue between Israel and the Palestinian people. Now, in the latest bit of information that has come in, two Israeli settlers who are said to be sisters have reportedly been killed, and one is said to be seriously injured in a shooting incident in occupied West Bank. Now, the incident has come just hours after the Israelis launched missiles towards Gaza and Lebanon. The Israeli defense has said the attacks were a response to the 34 missiles that reportedly were fired from southern Lebanon on Thursday. It has now blamed Hamas for the attacks, which the group has denied. Now, this is the biggest such attack that has taken place since 2006, when Israel had fought a war with the heavily armed Hezbollah. The tensions are, of course, running high in the region after 2 nights of repeated Israeli raids inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which happens to be the 3rd holiest site in Islam. This is where the Israeli soldiers had stormed inside the mosque premises, and these are the scenes that unfolded. The Israeli soldiers used flashbangs and also stun grenades on the worshippers inside the mosque. Now, the Muslim faithful, meanwhile, gathered at the tense Al-Aqsa Mosque this Friday evening for Friday prayers. Now, this, remember, is the 3rd holiest site in Islam, but it has been witnessing repeated incursions by the Israeli soldiers. The holy Muslim site is built atop of what the Jews claim is the place of their ancient temple which existed before, which also happens to be Judaism's holiest site.
والله اليوم الحمد لله يعني كويس الطريق وفيش صعوبات وبس الناس يعني مجبجبين ومش قادر يعني تصل للأقصى يعني حسب الأحداث اللي صارت في الأقصى يعني كل الناس يعني خايفة من الأحداث اللي صارت أول امبارح يتولوا.
And Lebanon's Iran-backed armed militia, Hezbollah, has warned that it will support measures taken by the Palestinian groups against Israel after the Israeli soldiers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, Hezbollah has close ties with Hamas, which of course is in charge at this moment of Gaza. It also has close ties with the Islamic Jihad group, which is also based in the coastal enclave. From Rana, take a look.
In the Jordan Valley, 2 Israeli sisters were killed and their mother seriously injured in a shooting attack on Friday afternoon. And in Jerusalem, there's been further stone throwing by some rioters on the Temple Mount Al-Aqsa compound towards the gate where non-Muslims enter. Meanwhile, I'm outside a public bomb shelter. These were opened today in the south and in some central cities, following rockets fired from Gaza into southern Israel. And in a first, rockets were also fired by Hamas from Lebanon into northern Israel. Israel has responded with strikes against Hamas targets, and pilots, drone operators and air defence reservists are being called up, with IDF intelligence suggesting that the unrest on all fronts was pre-planned and is being coordinated. This is Jodie Cohen for WION. World is One.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what's actually unfolding at this moment in Jerusalem, we're being joined by Alan Burstein, who is a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science in the University of California. Professor, thank you very much indeed for taking time out and speaking to us here in WION. And the question that I want to ask you is this. You know, we've been witnessing violence such as this that has happened this year. It's happened the previous years as well. Every time the Jewish festival of Passover coincides with the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Why is it that there is violence that gets sparked off when these two festivals coincide?
First of all, thank you for having me. As you pointed out before, the real source of tension is in this compound that is known as Temple Mount of the Jews in Israel, or Haram al-Sharif in Arabic. And this is really a compound that both contains the Al-Aqsa Mosque and is the historic site where the Second Temple of the Jews was destroyed 2,000 years ago, and there's the Western Wall, which is the most holy site to Jews.
Absolutely.
What you really have here is a coming together of two radical sides. On the one hand, Hamas, that is sort of pumping into social media and calling upon Muslims to come and defend Al-Aqsa Mosque against Jews coming and worshiping on the Temple Mount. And on the other side, you have radical fringe groups in Israel called the Temple Mount Faithful, among others, who say that they want to storm the Al-Aqsa Mosque and make sacrificial lambs there and restore the holy days of Judaism. So really it gives this conflict, which often is sort of on a low-level nationalistic element, it gives us this religious element when Passover and Ramadan come together, and that's why there's this constant flare-up every time this happens.
It's baffling to look at, because these are, festivals for both religions, for the Muslims and also for the Jews. Why is it, do you think, that people of both these faiths cannot adhere to the teachings of their faith, go about with their practices without causing trouble to the other?
I wish I had an optimistic answer for you, because as you say, both faiths really do preach tolerance and peace among the things that should happen. What happens here is that there is a sort of historic nationalistic and ethnic conflict between Israel and Palestinians that in its origins, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, was not a religious conflict. In its origins, It was a nationalistic conflict. Both sides wanted the land, wanted the territory. And what has happened in the last 20, 30, 40 years, the radical elements on both sides have turned it into a religious conflict. So now there has a lot more religious fervor, and you sort of attach religiosity to the nationalistic element, and that creates a lot of violence. There's very little rationality, and you can't really appease the other side and say, okay, I'll give you this, you give me that, if you're fighting God's war. So Hamas has a much easier time inflaming people to come cause violence on Al-Aqsa, and in turn, fringe elements within the Israeli settler movement have a much easier time telling people, come, you need to come liberate the holy Temple Mount, and et cetera, et cetera. It's not that easy when it's just nationalistic. When you infuse religion into it, it really becomes easier, unfortunately, to cause violence.
Absolutely, indeed. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us and getting us that very nuanced perspective of this violence and this conflict that is unfolding. It's baffling as to why, when these two religious, adherents of these two religions gather, and when their festivals coincide, why is it that they cannot go about observing the rituals of their respective religions without actually indulging in violence? Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION.
It really is tragic. Thank you for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.